Don't believe Law and Order. Don't believe Suits. Like, none of it's real. Like, watch it for the entertainment value. But if you think that's how they're going to let you behave in a courtroom, like, please dissuade yourself of that rather quickly.
GovCon has a language on its own. Acronyms, compliance, contracting. When you're new, well, it can feel a little bit like alphabet soup.
And no one hands you a decoder ring. We're your hosts, Ziadeh and Camille Tuutti, and we're here to get real about how people actually break in, level up, and lead in government contracting.
Today's guest made that leap and learned a few lessons the hard way, like what it really means to bill 3,000 hours and survive 100-hour weeks at a top litigation-only firm.
Today, he's a general counsel who's seen it all, and he's sharing some of his stories. That includes how he had to unlearn some habits from high-stakes litigation, the mistakes he made along the way, and what you can learn from TV lawyers, even Saul Goodman.
Let's get into it. Our guest today is Jim Rittinger, General Counsel and Corporate Secretary at Empower AI. Thank you for being here, Jim.
Thank you for having me.
So, Jim, you have about 30 years of legal experience in government contracting and practicing law. So when did you know that law was a career path that you wanted to pursue?
I was a liberal arts major in college. I had a history and classics major at Boston College. And honestly, I knew I wasn't going to be a history teacher. So it was either practice law or, collect cans. And practicing law, seemed like a more practical outcome.
What's that one piece of advice you wish someone had told you at the beginning of your law journey or entrance into GovCon?
The one thing that I wish I had known when I first sat in like a general counsel's chair for the first time was to really, take a moment or two or three when problems roll in and try to take as much emotion and passion out of it. I was a litigator by training. I litigated in New York City for 10 years before I moved to DC. And, I was an attorney at Quinn Emanuel, which is one of the preeminent litigation firms in the world, really known for very passionate and zealous advocacy. And that's great when you're like the hired gun that's coming in to a really big problem. But when you're sort of the day-to-day lawyer for a company or the head lawyer for a company, I think it behooves you to be a little bit more dispassionate about things. But what I had to learn was when you're sitting in the general counsel's chair, like you have to sort of get the facts and gather the facts. And sometimes the first facts that come in aren't really what happened. And so it behooves you to sort of refine everything that comes in and catch a breath or two, and figure out the plan. The level that I was practicing at that point, I was, a senior associate, counsel, junior partner type. I wasn't in charge of the grand strategy. I was in charge of like, we're going to go take that hill. So let's go take that hill. Sitting in this chair, I've got to think from a more 30,000 foot perspective.
When you graduated from law school, do you have the expectation that you have to be cutthroat? Can you be a lawyer and be kind of a nice person, a nice guy, a nice girl?
I can say this. I've always been collegial with my colleagues, and I've always gotten along well with everybody that I've worked with. I think that's one of my actual sort of innate strengths. But, when I came out of law school and I clerked for the chief judge of the Southern District of New York, and then, walked into one of the top 10 law firms in the world, along with like 80 other associates, all of whom were jockeying for position to, advance as litigators. And the firm culture, Quinn, the firm culture was winning. We're going to win. Like there was a T-shirt that they passed out to all of us, when you got there as an associate. And it was like, Quinn Emanuel, winning is what we do best. And that mindset has served the firm very well. When I first started at Quinn, it was an office in Los Angeles and then a tiny office in New York and a tiny office in Silicon Valley. Today it's a global firm, with thousands of lawyers and, it's like the AmLaw third most profitable firm in the world. So yeah, a little bit is the culture. Like the culture was that people hire us and pay us this money because these are high stakes cases. And, you've got to be willing to fight and slug it out. And that's kind of what we do. We're trial lawyers. They don't hire us to write pretty letters to the other side. And it's great if you can work out a settlement, but really by the time something comes to a firm like Quinn Emanuel, the client is convinced that we're going to litigate this to the hilt. We're going to try this in front of a jury, and it's a different mindset. It's a very aggressive mindset. And so I don't know if it was innate in me. I mean, I think to some degree I don't think I would have thrived there if I didn't have a certain innate aggressiveness. I was a college athlete. So, I had that in me, but, Quinn certainly cultivated that, if that answers your question. Like, I think it was a combo of nature and nurture.
Yeah. And you have a competitive side being an
Yes.
athlete.
Yeah. I like to win. I really do.
Yeah, I think immediately of like law shows where young attorneys will come in or associates to interview at a law firm, and they're all sitting in the waiting room wearing like a similar suit and tie and kind of looking at each other. I was just picturing that in my head. It sounds like a very competitive field to enter so young too.
Yeah, I mean, it is. They take you, you're 25 or 26 years old, and yeah, I mean, it's time to put on your big boy pants. You're going to work. You're going to work 100-hour weeks. You're going to bill almost 3,000 hours a year, and they're going to do that until you either make partner, burn out, or find something better to do. Mm-hmm. I was there for 10 years. I'm not sure what that says about me one way or the other, but that's the mindset that you're coming from.
Awesome. So what is one common misconception about the law field that you want the younger generation to know? Or was there a moment of reality about this particular misconception that set in for you?
Well, it's going to sound a little contradictory from what I've just said about sort of default aggressive and charging forward, but advocacy is a huge part of this, but problem solving, I think, is an even bigger part of it. So yeah, you want to be a passionate advocate, and you want to go full throttle for your client. They're paying you a lot of money for you to do that. But ultimately, the end goal is to extricate them from whatever problem they've gotten themselves into. And if that requires going to a jury, then great. Then you're going to try this, and it's going to be trench warfare until it's all done. But if you have the opportunity to save your client millions of dollars in legal fees, by some creative thinking, like that's critically important also. And especially now that I'm sitting in the chair that pays those bills, I love zealous advocacy, but I'm also always looking for a potential off-ramp that saves the company money and resources.
What do you think, when you look back at your career, what do you think is the biggest challenge you've faced, and what made you push through it?
I mean, I think I was selected to be a general counsel pretty young. Ross Perot hired me to be the general counsel at Perot Systems Government Services at like 36 years old. I think back now, I mean, I was a baby. And I remember I had an interview with the general counsel at the parent company, Perot Systems, and had an interview with, I guess, the chair of the subsidiary board. And then I actually had a meeting with Ross Perot, brief that it was, but, we were going through the things that he wanted me to focus on. And a lot of it was transactional and M&A work. And here I am, I'm a litigator. And I remember saying to him, like, Mr. Perot, like, I'm a litigator by training. I'm going to do my best, but like, this is sort of my first rodeo with respect to M&A. And he had this very distinct voice, and he just looked at me. He's like, well, Jim, you're a smart kid. You'll figure it out. And at the time, I guess when you come from the world that I came from, like you think through everything, and you're always trying to figure out the path, how to get there. And you want to have a definitive answer in your pocket. Like, you don't go to trial with like a general idea of, well, maybe it'll go this way, maybe it'll go this way. Like, you want to know, I know what the witnesses are going to testify to before trial. And it's up to me to try to elicit the information in a way that the jury can digest it the easiest. But the facts on the ground are known by that point. You sit in the general counsel's chair, and you're sort of the first line of like, the facts come into like your line attorneys, and your line attorneys turn around and say, okay, sir, or Jim, rather, that nobody calls me sir. Jim, these are the facts on the ground, and then you sort of have to sift through it. What I would say is the the challenge was just, I landed in this company it was a $1.4 billion company that had 5,000 or 6,000, employees. And I had never managed more than a litigation team of maybe 15 or 20 lawyers. And all of a sudden I've got, 100 contracts people and 3 or 4 lawyers, and they're all reporting into me. And I had to sort of figure out on the fly, like, how does this work? There's a way you manage people at a law firm, and it's a lot different than managing people in sort of a corporate setting. A law firm, it's sort of like a locker room in a football team or something, which is like where I came from. There's some occasional yelling. There's a lot of passion. There's a lot of people that there are no shrinking violets in that room. Mm-hmm. And there's nobody whose feelings are going to get hurt by direct commentary. Now, you don't gratuitously go yell at people, but like there is some of that. I mean, I've been chewed on by enough partners in my life as a junior and mid-level and senior associate that it takes a lot to get me upset at this point in life. You get to sort of the corporate environment, it's more collegial. You're really trying to you're not fixing massive problems every day. You're trying to keep the ship of state moving. And so it's a different sort of interaction and communication. You got to be a lot more personable. You got to be approachable, and I'm lucky in some respects that came sort of naturally to me, but it was definitely a learned skill, on some level also. And that, I had to sit there and look at I've got a contracts administrator, like she's really good at what she does, but she's not like a high powered associate that we're paying a ton of money to, and we're expecting an enormous amount out of her. We expect her to do her job, and we want to communicate to her that, we want you to do your job correctly. But we also want to make her feel good about doing her job. We want to retain people. That's sort of another thing is the law firm is more of a churn and burn environment. You bring in these associates and it's up or out. And so that, you don't have to be as gentle in that environment. Whereas the really good companies that I've had the opportunity to work for since I went in-house, retaining a good team is like the most crucial aspect of the whole thing.
You're 36, you're in front of Ross Perot. You are asked to do a job that you're not sure if you can really do it, or you don't have the training for it. So did you have a moment of imposter syndrome? A lot of young people talk about it.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
not just young people. I mean,
I still have that sometimes today. I mean, look.
Oh, you do?
When I took this job here, I looked at it and I was like, I don't know. I was like, am I ready for this? Like, I don't think that ever goes away. And I think that's good, actually. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, when I was hired by Perot Systems, I remember thinking to myself, am I the dog that just caught the truck? Like, you're pursuing this and you want this, and then you get it. And again, like the enormity of the organization and like, this multi-billion-dollar company. And I knew when I was hired that they were moving towards a sale of, within like 2 years. And, I don't know how long it took, but, I'd probably say about 6 months in, I thought to myself, okay, I can do this. I belong. Now that isn't to say every new job that I've taken since then, when I come in, there are moments of doubt and there are seeds of doubt in my mind. And that's fine because that keeps you humble. And also, I would be worried if I came into a job and just thought like, I've got this all figured out. Like this is all going to be easy, because no plan survives contact with the enemy or life or whatever. So you can have all the plans in the world when you start a new job. Facts on the ground are going to actually, though, dictate the way things go. And so, yeah, no, I definitely had that imposter syndrome. I still think I have it today, like any new role that I take on. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
How would you tell someone to prepare for that shift from being a litigator in a law firm to the corporate environment?
You have to understand that it's a different culture. Mm-hmm. A litigation firm, and particularly like a big litigation firm in New York City of all places, but DC is probably fairly similar too. It's an aggressive, hard-charging environment. And, you're going to work ridiculous hours. You're going to rack up enormous travel miles if you're in like an international practice, which I was. American Airlines probably will have a plane named after me someday. But, and then you get to corporate, and in the best organizations, there's a lot of passion and there's a lot of esprit de corps. And that's also what you're trying to build also when you get there. But it's also a different mindset. Like when there's a big project, people will, it'll be all hands on deck, and people will be working long hours and hard hours, whether it's to get a proposal out, or if, God forbid, there is a litigation matter that ends up launching, you're going to put in enormous hours. But, the day-to-day functions, 98% of the people that have signed up to work at a company, they didn't sign up for 3,000 hours a year. They didn't sign up for, if it's Tuesday, I'm in, Los Angeles. And if it's Thursday, I'm in Seattle. And if it's Saturday, I'm in London. These are people, they want to do their job. They want to do it well. But, they also want to go home to their families and have a life. And like I said, you're trying to build sort of a continuity there. So you got to be judicious in terms of when you're demanding those extra hours and that extra effort, because you want people that are good, that'll be there for the long haul, and you don't want to burn them out.
I think when you're entering the workforce at any age, you always worry about that. And you think if you make one, perhaps your career is a little over, but it's not, we've learned. So what mistakes have you made that have kind of left you with a lifelong lesson?
Where do I start? No, I would say one that really comes to mind is I was at a company, I won't say the company, but I was at a company, and I was sitting on the subsidiary board of the parent company, and the subsidiary was a very large subsidiary. The chairman of the board of the subsidiary was a volatile personality, maybe a little bit dictatorial too. Like, he had been a very senior government figure, without going into further details, and had run some very large organizations and had been used to yes sir, no sir, no excuse sir type behavior, I guess, from his subordinates. And all of this came to a head, and there was a big issue between the parent and the subsidiary, and a series of really uncomfortable meetings happened with the parent board and the parent CEO and the subsidiary board and that leadership. And the subsidiary chairman that I was talking about took a position that frankly was indefensible and would have caused an enormous amount of problems. And he was demanding absolute obedience, to this position that he had staked out amongst the subsidiary people. And I looked at it and I was like, no, this is indefensible. You can't take this position. You're going to get us all into trouble. And I went at him very directly. It was, like I said, it was a heated series of meetings over a couple of days. And at that point, nerves were wearing thin, and I went full New York City litigator on him and hammered him. And it was brutal. And I was right. And I was 100% correct. But, you win the battle, which I did, but you realize, like, after you've won the battle, that the war is not going very well. I wouldn't say I lost the war in the sense that I didn't get fired and I kept my job, but I had to work with that guy for another couple of years at least. And it was a really unpleasant sort of situation. And it took almost that entire time to sort of repair the relationship to the point where we could effectively, like, collaborate and communicate. And, I came to realize that, he bore a lot of responsibility, but I bore an enormous amount of responsibility in my own right. I learned that sometimes it's more important how you say it than what you actually say. And sort of learned how to get around even like an intransient personality. You don't have to go right at that person. Sometimes an oblique strategy, an indirect strategy is more effective, and you can get there. It may take more effort, it may take more time, but that's worth it rather than leaving a smoldering crater where a relationship used to exist, and then having to rebuild that sort of thing afterwards. So I think that would be probably the biggest one.
I think diplomacy is often a painful lesson, and it comes with age. You learn how to be more diplomatic. I always say, I mean, I'm very direct because I'm Swedish, but I have learned throughout the years to be a little bit more diplomatic, a little bit softer. And it just comes with age and sometimes embarrassing or painful experiences where you realize, like, oh, shoot, maybe I should have softened my tone, or maybe I shouldn't have, been so aggressive, and maybe I shouldn't have tried to make my point or persuade this person in this way. So, yeah.
Yes, no, absolutely.
Hindsight is 2020. Though.
It is, but if you learn from it, then it can be super. Nobody gets through this life without scars. And when you get into your 50s, like I am now in my early 50s, I've got like 15 or 18 years of corporate and another like 10 years of litigation firm scars. And, those are hard-won lessons, but worth it. Like, it's all worth it. If you're willing to learn from them. Now, if you keep walking, you keep putting your finger into the same light socket over and over again, then, then it's just gratuitous pain. But like, if you actually learn from it, that's life. And it's the best education that you can get, really.
And at this point, at this stage in your career, having made it in the eyes of those still working their way up, has your idea of success changed? And where do you go from there?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I think when
you start out, like, let's start at the firm to begin with. So like, you start at the firm, like, you're one of like 80 baby lawyers that have all been dropped into this big office, in a skyscraper in New York. And I can say I grew up outside of New York City, so that wasn't like awe-inspiring to me, but I had a lot of friends that were yokels from, like, for lack of a better descriptive term, were walking around staring up at the sky all the time. Like, I can't believe I'm here. You do a little bit of that and you realize quickly, like, this is a very ruthless competition sort of, or a winnowing out of the field over the next 5 to 10 years. And you put your head to the grindstone, and it's really about your own, you want the projects that you're working on to be successful, but you want to be noticed, and you want to have your own sort of like brand that comes out of that, the partners on the case notice, like, well, Rittinger he's here till 3 a.m. every day, and he's back in the office at 7 a.m. the next morning, and he's just grinding and grinding and grinding. This guy's great. He's a billing machine, and he does quality work. If you talked about this in military terms, I was a platoon commander maybe when I got out. Like, I had a small team that I was responsible for. But again, like I said, very high pressure, high performance sort of environment. I think when I got to Perot Systems, and I never thought of it as making it. I don't think of it as making it now. It's just, this is now my role, is I've progressed to this role. And what does success look like in this role? Well, I can't get any more senior within the company that I'm working at. I'm the senior attorney at this point. So what does success look like? Well, success looks like group success. It's organizational success is what I measure, myself now against in terms of, I can be the greatest lawyer in the world, but if the company's failing, who cares? For me, it's I've got to be adding value in a way that, drives growth at the company. And that's now how I look at it. I want everyone else to succeed, because if everyone else succeeds, then I succeed. And so I think that's the mindset that you have once you've gone from being an individual contributor, or even like what I would call like a lower or mid-tier manager, to senior management, or sitting in the C-suite, or however you want to characterize it. At that point, it's all about the organizational success.
You mentioned being a billing machine, working 3,000 hours a year. What's that like, and why are associates and lawyers spending this much time in the office?
Well, I think there's a small number. I think there's a small number of firms where that's the case. But I think, like with Quinn, like the mentality was, this is what we do. Like, we're the you bet your company firm that people come to when all other viable options have been exercised and have been found wanting, and now we're going into, what I would call trench warfare, grinding tons of hours, working towards a trial or going through a trial. I think just it's certainly not for everybody, and I don't think it's for most people, to be honest. But I think, if you have a competitive personality like I did, and you're really focused, at least as a young person, in terms of individual success and winning, there's a certain prestige to it. Like I get to say, I'm like in a AmLaw top 5, top 10 firm. There's a financial reward to it. Those firms pay more, than other firms. So there's that. There's, a lot of it. There's a certain amount of insanity to it. I always laugh, like, as I got to be sort of, senior associate, counsel stuff. I had a beautiful apartment in Manhattan, fantastic views, wonderful amenities, and I barely ever saw the place.
Yeah.
And, I think for me, eventually, like, I got to the point where I was like, do I want to be, I was watching some of my mentors at the firm who were partners, and they were still flying all over the world, still working, enormous hours. I mean, John Quinn, who was kind of the chairman of the firm, who's probably now in his late 70s, he's still a machine, still an animal. Like, he still is out working. And, you look at guys like that and you're like, am I that guy? And I kind of realized I wasn't that guy, that I could do this probably for another decade and be fine with it. But eventually I was going to be like 48 years old or 45 years old and probably sitting on a giant pile of money, but never having spent it because I'm chasing the next thing and I'm working for the next thing.
You're too busy. You can't enjoy it.
You're just too busy. You're almost too busy to live. We laugh, like I'm still in touch with like some of the people that I sort of came up with, and there are a couple of them that are still in the firm life, and God bless them, and they're doing very well. And then there are a bunch of people like me who have gone in-house for, sort of a better lifestyle. And we reminisce about, the days where you'd work till 1 a.m. and then you'd be circulating an email amongst all of your friends that worked at other big firms, like, who's still at work and wants to go to dinner. You sort of immerse yourself in that, and you do it for as long and as hard as you can. And then at a certain point, most of us sit back and go like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. I've got to find a different path.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Jim, thank you for opening our eyes to the world of law. We are journalists, and, especially for our readers too, I think our listeners, I think it's something that we don't think about as often, especially in GovCon. We're mostly focused on the contracts and M&A and, the federal news, but this is such a large part of those successes. But on a less serious note, we can't let you leave without asking you what TV or movie lawyer you admired or rolled your eyes at the most.
I'm miserable to watch lawyer dramas or shows with. My
Are you
wife
looking
hates
for the
it.
facts?
Well, it's more just like, you go watch like Law and Order, and look, there are things about Law and Order that I love, but like, I've been in Manhattan State Supreme Court a billion times in my life. And I have never, ever walked from behind the podium up to the witness, pointing my finger at them, screaming at them that you're a liar, admit it, you're a liar, and turning to the jury and waving my hands around and being like, this man is a liar. And like, if you did that in Manhattan State Supreme, first of all, a judge would berate you and then probably order the bailiff to drag you out of the courtroom. So
are judges as scary in real life as they are in these courtroom dramas? I must know.
It depends on the judge. I've had some judges that were great, very collegial. I've had judges that were very cold and stiff. The judge that I clerked for in the Southern District, who was the chief judge of the Southern District, was a man named Charles Bryant, and brilliant jurist, probably the best boss I ever had in terms of teaching me about how a judge thinks, teaching me about how I should think as a trial attorney. Just a great guy and a warm, grandfatherly like figure to the people that clerked for him. But oh boy, if you were a big firm lawyer from like a Quinn Emanuel or a Cravath, Swain and Moore, a Williams and Connolly, and you came into his courtroom and you couldn't answer questions about the case that he had, or you weren't prepared to discuss issues that he thought were important, was important, you were going to get a butt chewing. At one point in my clerkship, I asked him, I'm like, Judge, like, how do you reconcile sort of the two? And he's like, well, look, I don't yell at like small country lawyers when they come in here if they're not ready, because I don't have that expectation. And but he's like, if you're a big lawyer and you're billing your customer $1,800 an hour or whatever it is, and you come into my courtroom and you're not ready, or you're not ready, to answer questions, like, you deserve whatever it is that I'm giving to you at this point. And I'm sort of giving it to you as like a lesson to your client that's hopefully sitting at the table next to you while this is happening. Like, hey, buddy, you're paying a lot of money to this guy and he's not serving you well right now. Mm-hmm. So that, to answer your question, like, I think judges come in all shapes and sizes, but yeah, there are some that you get in front of and you're like, oh boy, like I'm in for it. And there it's sort of like when you're stuck in like a wave, like it's best just to relax and let it roll over you and then come up for air when it's over. That's another piece of advice I guess I would have there, for a young lawyer who finds themselves in that situation.
Mm-hmm. And not to believe Law and Order.
Yeah,
don't believe Law and Order. Don't believe Suits. Like, none of it's real. Like, watch it for the entertainment value. But if you think that's how they're going to let you behave in a courtroom, like, please dissuade yourself of that rather quickly, just, for your own sake, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm. My favorite is Saul Goodman. I mean, that's a really stellar lawyer.
There's a lot to admire with Saul, actually, in some respects. I mean, he's certainly a creative problem solver. You can find something to admire in pretty much anybody, fictional or non-fictional, I guess. So I would say Saul is a creative problem solver.
All right. Be a problem solver.
Wrap this up.
Yeah. Well, Jim, thanks so much for letting us pick your brain and for sharing some advice to the next generation and some misconceptions about your field. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure talking with you guys.
Thanks for listening to Rookies to Rockstars. GovCon doesn't come with a playbook, but these stories might be the next best thing. Follow the show, share it with someone still figuring it out, and connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you.